A pastor wanted to illustrate the problem the disciples experienced in our scripture reading by asking 6 persons from the congregation to join him on the chancel. Once the 6 volunteers came forward, the pastor asked them to hold hands and form a circle. The members created a circle as they turned inward, facing each other. After this, the pastor asked the participants, "Is this the only kind of circle you can make?" After a few moments, the group of circle makers decided getting closer would form a different circle. Once again, the pastor asked if they knew a different kind of circle. Following a pause, the participants moved closer together. Asked again, they continued facing each other but stopped holding hands so that they could stand shoulder to shoulder with their arms around each other. Repeating the question if they could create still a different kind of circle, the group huddled even closer as though they were going to implode. The pastor, though, remained relentless and asked if they could create a different circle. After a very long pause, as the participants attempted to figure out how much closer could they possibly get to each other, finally, someone in the congregation helped spare their squished situation by shouting out, "Face out instead of facing in." With that suggestion, a whole new kind of circle became possible as the participants formed an outward-facing circle. And with that helpful advice in mind, suddenly all sorts of circle forming became possible as the pastor kept asking them to create a different kind of circle. Some of the circles they created had some of the circle makers turn sideways, and then another circle alternated with 3 persons facing inward and 3 persons facing outward. And another circle they formed had them seated on the ground, then alternating who sat and who stood. It was liberating once they adopted the radical idea that circles don't have to face inward. This is a strange concept for some, as many of us were taught from childhood that circles must face inward. The point the pastor was attempting to make with this exercise is that the inability to conceive of a different kind of circle is similar to the request made by James and John regarding heavenly seating arrangements. James and John were simply caught up in making the same old circle. They expected that since they had been listening to Jesus for 3 years and branding themselves as loyal followers, they expected to receive an honorable position for their righteous behavior, which was a traditional and expected view. They believed, along with others, that the Messiah would reward those who had been close to him. However, Jesus' message was unconventional as he spoke of servanthood, suffering, and even death for the sake of others. Jesus presented an unorthodox circle, which was very different from what the disciples had expected. Jesus declared that it was only through saving others and focusing on the powerless, the hopeless, the outcast, and the insignificant that his disciples would be called great. Jesus preached about a different kind of circle, which was difficult for his disciples to wrap their minds around. When he declared that to be a great disciple, they would have to willingly suffer persecutions, expect deceits and disloyalty, and recognize that death might be the only reward for all their sacrifices, they refused to hear this. And in one point in the Gospels, they even rebuked Jesus for saying such things. Jesus' teaching about the suffering on his account was and remains a difficult concept to grasp, both for us and by his followers as revealed by James and John when they approached Jesus initially to find out how they could earn front row seats to his kingdom. Essentially, they wanted to cut in line to get to the front, and they wanted to escape these trials and tribulations so that they could form an inward-facing circle. After all, Facing inward, they wouldn't have to deal with the discipleship of service for others. They could avoid the face-to-face encounters of outsiders, and they would not have to face the frightening aspects of Jesus' dire warning of rejection, abuse, failure, and even death. And Jesus recognized they were attempting to circumvent his teachings, that in order to save your life, you must give it to others, or that the first would be last and the last would be first. Jesus described very different circles that relied on the importance of awareness, listening, empathy, and building community. Jesus declared a new circle that understood the persons in the circle were not as important as the persons outside the circle, the ones needing served. In an essay written by Robert Greenleaf, a former AT&T Director of Management Development, he defined the style of service that Jesus described and demonstrated with his life and teachings by coining the phrase servant leadership. In 1970, Robert realized that large institutions needed to serve individuals or the larger society, and he worked within AT&T to influence this idea. Early on, he recognized that the organization exists for the person as much as the person exists for the organization. Later, he refined this working definition, saying that instead of the people working to serve the leader exists to serve the people. After retiring from AT&T, Robert Greenleaf focused on advancing the servant leadership way of thinking by starting the annual Greenleaf Servant Leadership Conference Summit, which brings business leaders from all over the globe together to gain experience and engage with others as they discover how to implement key practices of what it requires to be a servant leader. These practices involve embracing employees, staff, and customers with empathy and listening skills, taking time to socialize with a broad spectrum of persons, encouraging equal ownership opportunities within their business or schools or places of worship or other institutions. And the summit enables persons to develop their own style of being a servant leader. This is a very different circle. It was a circle described by Jesus as he constantly empowered his disciples to face outward so that they would serve and provide healing to the community at large. Jesus was concerned about his disciples turning inward toward each other because this is what he saw chiefly as a problem of the religious elites of his day. He observed how only those inside the circle were offered care and protection and validation. Jesus believed this was wrong, as it ignored the needs of those outside the religious circle. Thus, Jesus instructed his followers to focus their energy and their lives on serving others. Jesus taught his followers to turn their focus outward, and he encouraged his followers to be less self-fixated and self-absorbed, so that they would look at the needs of the community to offer spiritual healing and spiritual wholeness. Jesus encouraged and empowered us to look outside the circle of us, so we give ourselves in service to others. Granted, the life of being a servant isn't easy, but it's essential. Jesus says to his disciples and to us, "Look at my life. I didn't come to lead, I came to serve." This example, established by Jesus, remains essential today as we are called to create a new type of circle that lives into our discipleship for Christ. We are called to focus outward and embrace our community. We are encouraged to create disciples who focus on the life of doing mission work and focusing on the needs of those outside our circle. We do this first by gathering together so we learn the teachings of Jesus and discover where our energy is needed. Then after we are equipped with this knowledge, we then look at the missional field by learning about our neighbors, finding out what their needs are and embracing them so that we serve outside our circle. Accepting our role as Jesus taught, we embrace the challenge of leading through service as servant leaders. Let us go forth and do so knowing God is with us and embraces us and encourages us to look outward as we serve the community at large.